Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Online with an Architect. I'm Josh Odgers, and great to have you back on, Yves Sandfort.
Hi, Josh. How's your day been?
It's been very good, thank you. Appreciate all the discussion prior to the podcast as well. So today, we're going to talk very briefly on the comdivision and end-to-end partnership and the skills and qualifications we have between the strategic partnership. So let's jump straight in. Obviously, there's a lot of certifications in the VMware portfolio. We have the VMware Sales Professional and VMware Technical Sales Professional, what are your thoughts on those programs? They're kind of the prerequisite to VCP almost.
When it comes down to VSP and VTSPs, I mean, in the end, yes, they are kind of a preparation for later on VCP, etc. But I think it's always important, even if you have up to the highest level like VCDX exams, these are good to understand how are the packagings of the products going to work, because it's always easy to come in, even as an architect, and say just always buy Enterprise Plus or Platinum or Titanium or whatever else. But there is a cost effect for the customer. And if it's just one feature, and I see that often enough that we have just one feature, which is more or less the deal breaker between two different things. And therefore, I think it's very important to have an understanding on how product and packaging works, which is part of the VSP, VTSP scenario. Yeah. The other thing why I think these are very valuable, because they also give you an understanding on how VMware sees themselves in the market. I'm not necessarily always a big fan of how some of these train people on competition or anything else, because I always think you should be only talking about something which you really fully understand, and not just because someone gave you a PowerPoint explaining how you should actually battle any kind of competition. And that's also where whenever, and I have that very often on my live stream sessions, sometimes where people come, it's like, what do you think about this and that open source hypervisor? Where I say, it's like, look, I don't have enough day-to-day practice knowledge to really have an opinion on that. And that's why I should better actually keep my mouth shut about it. And I think that's exactly the point. But getting people basic understanding, and we, for example, also have a lot of the VSP, VTSP are baseline scenarios for our back office teams, even though they don't sell the licenses. But at least if they get on a phone with a customer, that they have heard the product names and have a rough understanding on what they are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great, yeah, for the sales teams to go through them. They don't take a long time. They do give you the knowledge on the licensing levels and some basic knowledge, terminology, things like that. So I think it's a great starting point, and obviously all partners have access through Partner University to do these. So I think that's great. And then we jump to the VMware Certified Professional level, which was the first VMware certification I think most of us ever did, the VCP. Mine was VCP 3. And so VMware Certified Professional, we have to take an exam with Pearson VUE, a proctored exam, so a bit more serious level than the VSP and VTSPs. And I think that's really just recognizing a good understanding of the products and some of the features, but not necessarily being a skilled engineer or implementation or architect in the technology, but just good general knowledge, I would say, is your VCP level.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the VCP exam, it has the same challenges as what every other industry vendor has as well. It's not an entry-level certificate, because I think entry-level always declassifies people who do that, because VCP is far more than entry-level. It's like, for example, if you just attend the VMware Install, Configure, Manage class, which is a prerequisite for it, so that you can actually take the exam, and that is not good enough. You need to have practice knowledge, and the time you have for all the exam questions and everything else. Even if I, worst case, would just give you, let's say, a physical book, because the internet would be too easy, it will most likely be impossible to pass the exam with it. So looking at that, and when you see the VCP exam over time, it has become a valid baseline certification, where companies also, when they look for engineers doing day-to-day implementation, they are looking for VCP qualified people. The reason for that is especially as all the, let's say more entry-level focused classes from VMware. So anything which is called install, configure, manage, or deploy and manage in the end, those are the entry classes to a specific product. And this is basically the next level certification. So you take the class, you get practice, you take the exam, and then you go up to the next class level. And when we look at it across both of our companies with end-to-end and comdivision, there is no wonder that we altogether have over 160 of these VCPs collected all across our teams. And the reason for that is also that even if you are highly qualified in one area, most of our people in the end user space also have a VCP on NSX. Some of them even have it on cloud and management. They don't go up to the VCAP or VCDX level across all these different technologies. But we, for example, said is like for at least a good set of people having at least 3 or 4 baseline certifications with the VCP is a very important step, so that you can really talk about that. For someone who never touches EUC, it doesn't make sense to make the VCP for EUC. But baseline, DCV, NSX, things like that are common across the board, and everybody needs to know them. So I think that's an important part. And as we speak about VCP, there is another one which is, I think, of a similar level, even though VMware doesn't really have a comparison table. But when they call out the specialist exams, that's more or less a similar level of people getting qualified there. And I don't have the complete detailed number out of my head, but I think altogether we should have at least 50 or more specialists on our teams as well in combination.
And that's things like VMware, and that's things like Tanzu and other products. So
yeah, this is being done especially when there is not enough time to build a completely sophisticated certification program. I think that's potentially for the people out there very important to understand is a full-blown certification, whether it's VMware or anything else, has to go through by industry norms through different steps. So you have subject matter experts writing questions. They need to get valued. There is external evaluations about question quality from whether they are suggestive or misleading or other things. There are test exams, beta exams being run. That is far more complicated on the VCP or VCAP side than it is on the batch side, for example. And that being said, especially for new products, that is why VMware actually came up with a specialist badge, which does not necessarily mean that these are easier to achieve. It just means because they have to be more up to date or something else, it's a different approach to take you there, but you still have to learn and understand the products for it.
Absolutely. And then the Master Specialist exam is the level above the Specialist. So for vSAN, you have vSAN Specialist, and then that's the prerequisite for the vSAN Master Specialist exam. So the Master Specialist to me is sort of coming closer to the VCAP level, or the VCIX level in terms of comparisons, but maybe not quite to that level, but getting closer.
I think it's getting closer to it. I mean, the whole idea when we look at the VCAPs, when they were initially introduced with, I think it was version 4 or something like that, that's where we had the first VCAP levels. And I think we had several people on the team who were in the 2-digit number space when they did the VCAP exams. And they were basically 2 different types. One was for design and one was for deploy. Not all products had both of them, especially up until a few years ago. Some of them, I think NSX took a while until they had both. They had for a long period only the deploy part, so the actual doing of things. And the Master Specialist is kind of in between. They don't have any hands-on exam like what VCAP has, where you really have to physically, or not physically, but virtually do something on a system. But they ask questions which are going deeper than the specialist one. So that's why I would actually say as you, it's similar to the VCAP. It's not necessarily the same, but also some of them qualify for the master services competencies and other things. So it's an upper skilled exam and title. But just looking at VCAPs overall is across the 2 teams, we have, I think, based on the latest numbers I have seen, we have now 83 VCAPs, which have been applied by all our people. And when you take the VCAPs, VMware introduced a few years ago the implementation expert, a bit of a not side by side with the VCDX, because the VCDX needs to be an implementation expert by now in the first place as well. But when you actually in a specific area like data center virtualization or end user computing or anything like that, if you achieve both VCAPs, so the one for the design piece as well as the one for the deploy piece, you actually get your VCIX, your implementation expert. And that is a good criteria for customers who might not necessarily need a full-blown VCDX. But they are going for something which they need for themselves, especially when I look at it. VCDX is something which is not, even if you are a large customer, not necessarily something you need to have on staff day by day, because VCDXs are far more broad across different products, and they need to have the experience with constant different challenges to actually stay up to date. Whereas the VCIX is something where if I'm a larger corporation and I want to be sure that my people have enough deep understanding of design and deploy, this is something I should aim for, that at least some of my key people have actually certification up to the VCIX level, because that actually showcases that they can do both design and deploy of the different products. And especially over the pandemic, one of the advantages is now that you do not necessarily have to run to a test center anymore. I know that when I back in the days did my early VCAP level 4 exam, I had to drive 400 kilometers to a test center. I mean, I don't want to even know how far you had to drive down in Australia, but for us, that was 400 kilometers. And then you had to work over an RDP connection, over a horrible latency thing, because back in the days, it was not possible to just place these things that easy on the cloud, or I would argue it was, but that's a different story. But it was not fun to do these exams. It was not fun, even if you knew everything, because the technology was driving you crazy on the side.
The VCAP implementation exam. Oh, the first time I did that, version 4, wow, it was so bad. It's so slow. The mouse was like going like this across the screen, and then you click, and then it waits, and then you'd get like a reconnection every now and again. And my session dropped out. I had to like pause, put my hand up for help, and then they had to come in and restart the session. So yeah, it was a bit of a disaster back then. But obviously, the newer versions are much more well designed, and they're a pretty good experience.
They are much better from that perspective. You can take them at home. So even though people are not living next to a test center, they can actually easily take them. And it's also, as you said, it's no longer necessary to go anywhere. It's like lately, or in the early days, for us, it was standard program. We go to VMware, VMworld back then. Now it's VMware Explore. You go back to a VMworld and you were actually sitting 2 or 3 exams. For most of us, it was 2, 3, 4 exams we did there, because you were near enough from a latency perspective that it was a much better experience.
Yeah,
so
in Australia, that's what a lot of people did. They waited till VMworld and they went to VMworld, attend the conference, and do as many exams as they could to avoid that latency issue. So yeah, that's tough, sitting multiple advanced level exams in a short space of time. But yeah, quite a few people pulled it off. So very impressed.
Yeah, so as I said, so when we sum up the numbers, we have 83, so over 80 VCAPs on the team altogether, end-to-end and comdivision. When we look at VCIX, however, we have crossed the 50 mark there as well. So over 50 implementation experts from that perspective, which clearly covers all the different technologies. But you also need to keep in mind for all of these is VMware only does VCAP and VCIX for the 4 or 5 main top lines. So that's for the data center virtualization, which is basically bread and butter, vSphere and everything else. You have it for the network and security piece, NSX. You have it for cloud management and automation. You have it for the end user computing space, and I need to actually read on my space, and I think it's currently called end user computing. As I have the list here of all the old certificates, it went from desktop and mobility over digital workspace, over this and that. And I think the current title is now end user computing.
Yeah.
We are all looking forward for the new ones on the app modernization, etc. piece, but there is that part. But also when you look at other vendors, there are others who are actually have different approaches to this. Just to mention that is, for example, on the AWS side, their architect exams more or less always span the complete AWS scope, which is when you come out of the VMware world and someone tells you it's like there is an associate architect, you go, it's like, yeah, okay, as if I would ever even care. Yeah. And then you sit that exam and you go, it's like, damn, with 300 products, being an associate architect is already a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if the scope's very broad, it's very difficult to become an expert as well. So even just the associate level would be tough. So with all these VCAPs and VCIXs, we've also, you and I are both VCDXs, both in cloud as well, which is very cool. One of the more rare VCDXs. So in total, between the two companies, what are we looking at for VCDX certified?
In total, we look. Yeah, so in total we look at about seven certifications, I think, across 5 or 6 people, 6 people, I think. And when you look at that, we cover we again cover almost all the territories, and I think the important part is, when you look at it also, is that when you look at the VCDX numbers, because that is the only area where you can compare it, is like we have people basically, I would say, out of every generation of VCDX on the team. It's like from the very early starters up on to the ones who actually just finished it up over the last couple of years. And I think still it's a very distinct certification. I think it's completely undervalued in the market still. People, and I guess you have been going through that by yourself as well. There are still scenarios where you sit down with a customer and you go, it's like, yeah, potentially when it comes to certification, and I'm VCDX as well, and they go, it's like, yeah, that's fine, but do you have a VCP? And you go, it's like, damn.
Yeah.
Again.
We
so let's start that
hard to promote that program and make sure people understand the value of VCDX. And the differentiation, actually going through all the exams we've talked about today, from even the associate level, the VSP, VTSP, through VCP, through multiple advanced professional exams to get VCIX for being double VCAP, and then obviously submitting for VCDX with the documentation piece and the in-person panel defense. Obviously, yeah, that's a very long journey that we've both enjoyed and completed. And of course, refreshing VCDX requires us to sit the VCAP design exam on a regular basis as well. So it's not a one and done. It's something you need to keep up to date. And yeah, that's a challenge for all VCDXs to continue that knowledge through the VCAP exams.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at the VCDX storyline, is a lot of the exams below that. So when it is VCP, VCAP, and everything else, those are exams where I would say, in some cases, people are, I would not necessarily say forced, but it actually, it is a job requirement for them. Someone tells them, it's like, if you want to have a certain role, you need to actually do this. VCDX is a different story because from my perspective, VCDX means a lot more of personal dedication towards really achieving this. This is nothing where, and this is always when I had people come to me and said, it's like, my boss had told me that I should become a VCDX, where I go, it's like, okay, so what do you think about that yourself? And when then people say, it's like, yeah, I'm not too sure if I should go that, not from a skill set, but they just don't have the motivation for it. Those are the candidates where I'm typically, I would say you have at least over 80% chance that they are not going to survive, because it's the level of dedication you need to set into it, the things you have to actually bring yourself up to speed with, and actually going through the defense and everything else. this is nothing you can really do without really being dedicated for it. And when you look at it from an overall perspective as well, is it's an achievement. It's more like a lifetime achievement. And I spoke during my preparation for cloud and management, because back then networking was one of the more weak parts. And I had a bunch of CCIEs, for example, help me and basically roast me for several sessions up until that area was kind of bulletproof. That was even an area where quite a few of them said, it's like, look, it's like everybody in the industry sees CCIE as a high level scenario, but they said it's like what you guys actually go through for VCDX is a completely different ball game, just because CCIE is far more on the practice side, and they really need to prove that they can do it. Which in the end sounds always more complicated, but being able to, from an abstraction perspective, to just actually design something also ad hoc, where someone just throws this you as like, yeah, it's nice that your design is all on a blade chassis, but how would this look like if we were to actually apply rack servers? And those are typical scenarios. And from a VCDX, you just expect that he can more or less just turn around, walk to the whiteboard, and actually draw it up and say, it's like, this is how we would actually solve this with rack servers, or this is how we would solve this if it's stretched instead of in one data center.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's been my experience with VCDXs, is they can do that on the fly. They can adapt to changing situations and difficult and stressful situations. And, you know, maybe that's a value that we need to promote about VCDX more, is that these people have gone through a significant process over a significant piece of time as well to be able to achieve that certification. And probably one of the unwritten values of a VCDX is their resiliency as a professional. And that's the type of person you want to lead a very long and complicated project that might go for 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. And that resiliency that people learn throughout the VCDX journey, or that they have to experience, is great preparation for very long, difficult projects where the scope keeps changing and you have different variables that throw a spanner in the works. So that's probably a topic for another time, but I just thought of that then. It's something we should really promote more.
But I would also take an additional step, because we are all working in IT. One of the things which, at least I haven't met a lot of people in IT who really like doing documentation tasks and things like that. One of the very important steps when you are applying for VCDX is not only that you can stand in front of a panel and actually defend all of that and actually draw it up nicely on the whiteboard. You have gone through the process of at least once proving that you can document it very well, which is also whenever I see things from VCDXs where they go and where the documentation is more on the light end side, where it goes like, but you know how to do it better because I know you have done it once. So I think that's a huge differentiation across all the other exams. It's like, if I go into a design exam, I'm actually updating myself with the product and everything else. It does not necessarily mean that I have ever written a real design around that product.
Absolutely.
It just means, in theory, I have all the knowledge to actually do that. But it does not mean that I can do it, actually. And a VCDX is on the opposite side of that. VCDX, I mean, just to be invited to be in front of the panel, you should have proven already that you can write your design in the first place.
Excellent. And whether you can defend it live or not, your standard is extremely high. So I think a VCIX who has even submitted successfully to VCDX, even if they've failed the actual final defense panel, is an achievement in itself. That almost needs to be another little badge of honor, that your documentation was submitted to an expert standard, even if your in-person wasn't. So whether we need another VMware badge or not, I don't know, but it's certainly an achievement just to be accepted to that panel, for sure.
I would say so as well, because the challenge is being in front of a panel is not necessarily something for everyone, and it really heavily depends on the panel. And I have always been openly running around with my experience of being on two defenses for myself, for my cloud and management and automation. And I'm not going to rattle down the whole storyline of why and how and when, but the whole story behind this of looking at different people, especially back then when I did it, because I was just in the crossover phase between Cloud Director and back then still vCloud Automation Center, was a challenge by itself. But it is a personal thing. Even though if you have three panelists and there is a lot being done to try to not make it personal, you need to always think about, you have these three panelists sitting in a room potentially, especially in the high times of VMware, for 2, 3, 4 days and doing one defense after another, is like they get opinionated between each other. And if one says then potentially, and this is how not things should be, but if one is something completely against one candidate, there is an influence. We are all humans. These are things which are happening.
Yeah, and job as well,
so as you said, it's like getting to the stage of being invited in the first place is already an honor by itself.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons we value it so much as companies, is because there is a huge amount, and you and I both know firsthand the level of effort that goes through each of these exams and the VCDX submission and ultimately the defense. So I think that really summarizes why we're so committed to these education programs, is because we've personally seen the value and we want to lead by example for our teams.
And it is one of the reasons, for example, when I look through my team, I mean, we have not only the certified people on our team, we have 8 instructors, 8 VMware certified instructors on the team, many of them since version 3 or 4 of vSphere. But we are also working on the certification programs with, I think we have, I just looked at the numbers. We have 33 participations in exams over the last couple of years, where we were actually either on the VCP or VCAP level directly involved in building these exams. And you can easily look that up in the exam blueprints as well. So that also showcases, again, when we look at it overall, what end-to-end and what comdivision does, is we are not only there to actually be a good partner on the one hand side, but we are also thriving on these education programs all together and actually together trying to make the exams more relevant for the business, because an exam which is just proving that you know the newest features is never as good, because the end customers are depending on these exams as well, but also trying to do the knowledge transfer, trying to be there. And I know you have been a mentor in the field for several years. I have been doing that for many, many years. I can only always encourage people, and I think that's potentially a good shout out here as well, is if you really are fancy of becoming a VCDX and you think you have the toolkit for it, but there is something which is actually blocking you from getting there, let's have a chat and figure out if we can help you get across that bridge and actually soften that path for you, because it's, for some, it's sometimes simple. There are some baseline certifications missing where we can potentially figure out a way on how we get you there. Or if it's just lack of mentorship and or you're working at a large corporation, but you always design exactly the same way. And that does not by itself help you. You need to have the other scenarios. And I did that in the past, for example. I had a candidate who said, it's like, I really dedicated to do a VCDX, but everything I have at my company is not relevant enough for becoming a design. Where I said, it's like, look, very simple. Then I'm going to be your customer. I'm going to be the painful guy who is actually going to give you requirements. And I'm going to change my mind on the way just to make it a real life experience. Because that's also what happens as you go through it, is like that all of a sudden someone throws a stick at you and actually says, it's like,
in the real world,
no, I can't remember that we said we are going to go with OSPF. We are going to do BGP or something.
Yeah. The longer the project, the more things change over time. And I think, you know, that's true. So when we're mentoring people, we want to make sure we change it up and challenge them to think about new ways and alternatives. And in the real world, we have the experience to, you know, handle these changing scenarios, changing products, changing, like my VCDX design was originally on 4 and we implemented it on version 5. There was an enormous change between those two versions. And just to be able to switch up between two major version changes is something that is very important to practice and also test yourself and validate on. So there we go. I think there's a good summary for everyone about the VMware certification programs, what comdivision and end-to-end bring to the table in terms of experience and qualification. And of course, as Yves said, please reach out if you need any help with mentoring or any advice on these certifications, and we're more than happy to help. So we'll wrap it up there for today, Yves. Thanks, as always, for your time. And it's great being a partner with comdivision, and look forward to producing a lot more content with you in the future.
We will, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, good morning to you.